Michael Shifter is the president of the Inter-American Dialogue. He gave us his assessment of this year's political crises in Latin America, beginning with Bolivia, where he believes former President Evo Morales still has a political future.
Well, Evo Morales still has a base of support and people who are loyal to him within his party, which is called the MAS party, the Movement Towards Socialism. And it seems like, so far, in Buenos Aires, he's going to be playing a role in terms of mobilizing and guiding his supporters. There are other parts of his party who are more moderate, who have taken some distance from Morales, who are trying to work things out with the interim government there to have elections in the next couple of months. The chances are there'll be elections in March or April. Morales is not going to go back to Bolivia. He's not going to be a candidate.
And if he does go back, he could be arrested.
He would be arrested. The government has said that they would arrest him. So we have a very, very complicated situation. The best scenario is that there are elections and that Morales' party has a candidate. The other parties have candidates, and that there are conditions for a free and fair election.
Let's move on to Chile. No end to protests there. And of course, they began with a proposal to hike subway fares. They scrapped that idea. These protests really grew into something much bigger. What is it going to take to quell these protests, which are also now about making constitutional reforms?
Mm-hmm. Well, it's going to take a long time. The fare hike was quite modest, but it set off reactions, and there are a lot of grievances in Chile for people that whose path and social mobility has been stopped, has been more precarious than many people thought. People who had done pretty well, poverty has gone down, the growth, it's been a prosperous economy, but still they haven't been able to sustain that level and climb the ladder, the socioeconomic ladder. So people are indebted, heavily in debt, they're tired, they're fatigued, they see a political class that seems disconnected from their daily concerns and their daily needs. And so there was just a lot of pent-up frustration, anger that just exploded on October 20th. Very violent, very massive, and it's going to continue to play out. The constitutional changes might be a step in quelling it, but I really don't think that's going to be enough. I think something much more fundamental will need to happen in Chile.
So we talked about Bolivia, we've talked about Chile. How are the protests that unfolded in Peru and Ecuador, which seems to have subsided at this point, how were they different from what we saw in Bolivia and Chile?
Well, in Ecuador, there was also a lifting of subsidies for transportation, but this was quite significant. This had a tremendous impact, and it was predictable that people were going to protest and people were going to be very upset and very angry. So they went to the streets, and there was a lot of violence there, a lot of destruction in Ecuador as well. And then the president himself, Lenin Moreno, went to another city, Guayaquil. Then there was a negotiation where the UN and the Catholic Church played a role, and the government pulled back its measure. And so things have quieted down, but you have a weakened government and one that's very, very difficult to make any progress and any reforms. So things have quieted down.
And what does 2020 look like for Venezuela? Certainly opposition leader Juan Guaido, which had rallied so much international support. We haven't heard much from him lately, or President Nicolas Maduro.
Well, things seem to be in a stalemate and seem fairly stuck. Maduro seems to be firmly in control. Clearly, he's unpopular. He has about 10–12% support. Most Venezuelans want a change of government, but he continues to control the armed forces. He continues to control the national territory, all the bureaucracies. Juan Guaido still remains the most popular politician in Venezuela, but his numbers have gone down considerably. People are weary, they're frustrated, and many of them are just focusing on surviving in Venezuela. The conditions are terrible, and many, of course, have left. There have been almost 5 million Venezuelans who have left the country since 2015, and that exodus continues. So the prospects there are not very bright for 2020.